It's a season of layoffs, and we're not just talking about Twitter, which is dealing with a storm that has hit its management, but it seems to be across the board as far as the tech space is concerned. Now, after a stellar bull run during the pandemic, the sentiment across corporates seems to have changed. Layoff seems to be the theme for companies abroad, and back home, Silicon Valley is definitely shaken up. Once considered bellwether companies, the likes of Meta, Apple are facing immense pressure from investors, and it seems like employees are paying the price. The story is not that different for Indian startups. After a funding boom during the pandemic, some of the top Indian startups have resorted to now firing employees. So there are some estimates on how many have actually been fired. As per Crunchbase, about 45,000 employees have been fired in Silicon Valley in the top tech companies in this calendar year up to October. Other estimates put that figure for India in the startup space at 15,000. And these are big companies like Twitter, of course, Meta, Apple, Snap, Lyft. They are all now either freezing fresh hires. Microsoft is also, firing people. They're either freezing fresh hires, or they're letting people go, or they plan to let people go. Now, what is the reason for this is what we're going to discuss on the show today. Is this the oncoming of recession, and are these tech majors now preparing by cutting the flab, so to speak? Are there inherent issues with the optimism around these business models, which are now facing a reality check? What really is going on? And to speak on this, I'm joined now by Rituparna Chakrabarti of Team Lead Services, Vijay Sivaram of Quess IT Staffing, and Lloyd Matthias, Angel Investor, joining us on the show. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us this evening on the India development debate. Rituparna, let me just get your take. It would be fine to say that this is a limited situation in a certain context for a certain company. I could understand that if someone said that about Twitter. Elon Musk has come in and he wants to remake the way this company runs. But it seems to be a bigger story, isn't it?
Yes, of course. Thanks for having me back, Tamanna. I think it's first and foremost, my heart goes out to all those people who are getting affected by the current wave of layoffs. But I think one must realize that, especially in the tech-driven sector, this seems to have become a cyclical reality, because it seems that often there is this situation where there is a high tide and then there is a low tide. And usually the exuberance or the reaction to either one of the tides seems to be extremely extreme when it comes to how it impacts employees and human resources. So I feel that this is probably the time for everyone to reflect on the choices that are being made in high tide to avoid the extreme lows that we are seeing in the current scenario. If you delve deep into the business realities and consideration of all the companies that you mentioned, these are all business-driven imperatives for the survival of some of these organizations. But I do believe one could have avoided the current situations by not pushing themselves to a situation where such choices had to be made. So I think we have to be very careful, because we are dealing with human beings, we are dealing with human capitals, and it's really not inanimate objects, and some amount of planning and foresight and long-term thinking is important. Essentially, getting the balance between quarter century and the quarter results is very important. I think sometimes we get overly carried with the long-term narrative and then under-focus on the short-term narrative, right, or vice versa. I think trying to get the balance so that the most vital resources, which is human capital, is least impacted, is probably the order of the day.
Absolutely. That's the big picture. But I also want to talk a bit about how this is happening. Vijay, let me come to you. In Twitter's case, at least as per reports, it seems to be a bizarre situation. They've fired nearly 50% of the staff, and now there's some reports that they're calling people back, some people back, saying, oops, we fired you by mistake. There are reports that they're going to shut down their India office. It seems to be very, very chaotic. And that point that Ritu made, that at the end of the day, this is human capital. These are not inanimate objects. It's not like you're getting rid of, tables and chairs and computers in your office. They're people. Do you think that whole space now is becoming callous, easy come, easy go? You're on mute, Vijay.
So I don't think so. But let me first thank you for allowing me to be here and put my thoughts in. I have a few thoughts otherwise. I don't think the organizations are callous in this format. I'll keep, like you mentioned at the beginning, Tamanna, I'll keep one organization out. This could be a function of multiple reasons why. But if you look at the overall tech space in itself, you must understand over the last 18 months, there's been this huge tech surge that's been happening across the world. The need for digital talent has gone beyond, and this has resulted in a large format of hiring with increased compensation hikes, as well as deflating gross margins in many organizations because of the talent that's gone up. Now you have hunting winters that are happening across the world. You had a possible looming recession that's happening out there. So obviously an organization of, whether it's a startup or a large-scale organization, is possibly thinking as to what's their runway of cash they have, how do they improve their gross margins here on. So some decisions would be taken on those grounds as well. And there's a lot of startups that today, over the last 2 years, have invested in significant pilot projects, which they realize may not take off ever, and they've been quite conscious about it and taking that. So, but without doubt, I think if an organization has chosen to hire, they should be also accountable for that human being and what they should do with it. So there could be better ways of handling such large volumes.
What is the reason though? What is the reason? I mean, we're talking about why they've had to do it. Maybe they built up a lot of staff they didn't need. I mean, did Meta really need 87,000 people to work for it, for this functioning? All of that is there. But what do you think is the immediate prompt, Vijay? And this is a follow-up for you. Is this a prep for the recession fears that are coming, or is it a reality check that post-pandemic, maybe demands have not grown to that extent? Is it advertiser pressure? What is it?
So three things. One, it's definitely a looming recession threat that could happen, which could result in lesser demand for revenues, therefore costs being extremely critical, and most of these organizations are extremely heavy on talent costs. Number two, exuberant hiring over the last 18 months with increased wallet shares towards employees has resulted in also depletion of what they would call as the gross margin benefits that they would earn with a lower cost as well. And third, I think with the funding winter, this may not necessarily be with the large enterprise customers, but also with the startups, with runways of cash looking a lot more glimmer, you can't afford to keep adding capacity, and you'll have to be more efficient in the work that you do. So questions are being asked about what are the productivity rates, what are the outcomes that are expected from these employees and such. And if you have too many of them, then you need to be more efficient, productive. So multiple things depending on the context of the message at what stage it is.
Okay. Lloyd, let me come to you on your view on what really are we seeing, and is this just a story about Silicon Valley? It seems unlikely that in a world so connected that there would be a cold that we won't catch. In our own IT space, we're already seeing the murmurings of it in the startup space. How do you decipher what's going on right now, Lloyd?
Thanks for having me on the panel, Tamanna. I think just to add a very critical point to what Vijay just mentioned, I think one of the big reasons we are seeing, you can say a tech meltdown may be an exaggerated word, but a slowdown, and clearly if you look at the market caps of the big tech companies, I think it's the fact that we are almost at this post-COVID world. What we saw in 2020 and 2021 was a rapid acceleration of adoption of digital, right? Most of us through the lockdown lived our lives through digital. We were watching OTT, we were shopping online, e-commerce. And over the last 6 months, you see a discerning or a clear trend of people getting back to the real world. People are traveling, they're going out and about, fine dining, they're going to restaurants, going to pubs, going back to office. And that, in a sense, is diminishing of digital time. Lots of measures around that seem to indicate that people are spending less time. I mean, the bellwether of this category, for my mind, is Netflix. That Netflix is kind of not just plateaued, but lost of subscribers. So clearly, the tech sector, or specifically the digital tech, social media sector, is being impacted, right? So that's one reason. The other, as Vijay rightly mentioned, is there's an overall kind of funding slowdown that's affecting the entire digital economy, and obviously there's threats of a recession looming. I think these are large factors. Then, of course, there are more specifics, and coming specifically to the context of India, is that business economics are now beginning to play a role. Through 18, 19, and 20, we saw investors pretty much putting money into any startup and expecting a fairly good return. I think slowly and seeing the performance of some of India's big unicorns that went public in the last year and a half, I think investors are beginning to get much more real and asking tough questions of founders in terms of business economics, right? Where are my returns? What is the profitability? I think when this happens, then founders are forced to relook at their entire economics, are forced to relook at their overhead. And I think that's a significant contributory factor to this kind of slowdown and, in a sense, firing of people.
Rituparna, is it also reprioritizing what these companies want to do, an individual churn that they're going through? So Meta, for example, and Mark Zuckerberg has made it clear he wants to put all his eggs in the metaverse basket. It's not been reflecting well on the quarterly numbers for the company yet, but that's where the focus is. Maybe that's why I scaled down in other places. The same with Twitter. Elon wants to reimagine what this service will do and has decided to sack half the existing staff. So is it also just a lot of these large companies going through a mega churn?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that there are three kinds of organization mixed in this whole conversation. One are essentially product companies, which are the likes of Meta, Twitter, and so on and so forth. Then you have the Indian startup ecosystem, and then you have the services companies with the tech services. Each one of them, of course, have different concerns, and they're trying to deal with it. But one common thread across all of them is that growth at any cost is no more the slogan. I think there has been a phase where, whether it's investors, founders, they've been chasing growth eyeballs at any cost, and the cost really has started to hurt right now. So I think right now, as already shared by Lloyd and Vijay, that I think there is a focus in terms of moving towards sustainable profitability model, focus on productivity rather than just going and ramping up the market and painting the town red. I think that's no more the way forward, and that's clear. And it augurs well because I think it's painful right now. I know that what's happening is something that none of us have wished for, but better now than late. Because if we delay this, if we had some of these choices, if we would take more time and sleep over it, we live in an extremely unpredictable world. I think the repercussions of it could have been much, much more worse. So I guess it's difficult. Yes, on hindsight, organizations could have made better choices. As a matter of fact, I mean, let's not be very, very pessimistic about the situation. These resources are skilled resources. We do have a situation where there are many organizations who are undergoing, especially in India, where they are actually lacking the skill sets that they're looking for. So I'm hopeful that at least in India, quite a few of these skill sets, if not immediately, but soon will find alternate opportunities. It also brings into focus the importance of constantly doing an assessment of the skill levels. Are we investing enough in productivity? Are we seeing how much human resource is needed, how much is effective, how much we need to develop? And be very, very careful about expansion through ramping up of resources. We should also look at variable models of ramp up. I mean, why should there be only one option? Now we live in a world where we can have layered choices in terms of how we onboard human capital, and that way, you are setting the right expectations. I mean, if you think that you cannot give long-term career path to a certain section of your organization, I don't think you need to make those commitments. I mean, as long as there is transparency with which you kind of manage your operations, everybody understands that if business doesn't survive, there is no job. So we all understand that. And I'm sure human resource, human capital also understands that. But as long as we treat this whole phase of the learning and not forget about it when there is again high tide, I think it all goes well. Otherwise, I'll remain worried if this trend continues, because I've seen this every decade happening once. I mean, especially in the Indian IT sector, just a decade back probably, or less than a decade, we've gone through a similar situation. So we really, really need to be very cautious about our choices going ahead.
Do you think that this will, so two points over here, and Vijay, let me come to you on this. Do you think that this will get worse before it gets better? We've not seen that scale of cutback at all in Indian IT. They're still hiring, though maybe the pace of hiring may have slowed down, but they're still hiring. Are you going to see a spillover effect going forward? And advice for those in India who are suddenly finding themselves having to look for greener pastures or newer pastures?
Let me break that answer into a couple of points. One, at Quess, we still have a steady share of tech demands. So it's not that everyone stopped, right? You still see reported numbers of large organizations continuing to have 25 upwards of attrition. If they're still having attrition at that rate, that means people are getting jobs. So it's not that jobs are not available. I think we're taking a very small segment here which has been impacted, no doubt. But I think there will be 2-3 elements that you need to consider, Samana. One, there is November, December is generally a lull time in most technology sectors. Because it's holiday season, there's a lot of projects that get left on for the budgets for the year to come. So you will see a little bit of a lull in demand in the next 2 months for sure. But I'm quite confident that Jan onwards you will see you may not see the surge that you saw it last year, but you will see numbers going back in the beginning of next year. Number two, demands which are still in very high need are areas like full stack, DevOps, analytics, cloud. You will continue to see significant demand there because that's where the world is moving. And you will see enough requirements coming through. So I don't see much of an issue from a person that's possibly been laid off recently to have a long gestation period without a job. Now, what could further impact this is one, if the recession threat becomes real and you have global organizations cutting down on technology spend, you will see that flow through in the short run, but only to realize that after a few months that the digital need even would grow higher and you would go back on building up on the digital agenda. So if the recession threat comes out to be far more deeper and real, you will see a certain longer lull, but it will still come back because technology is the way ahead, digital is the way ahead. So it is, and there is no other place in India where it would get better than that. So you have, it's a lull, I would say, but I don't still see a problem for employees who are looking for a job and they have skills. They should still find jobs.
Well, hopefully they will, because these are highly skilled sort of positions. Lloyd, in terms of India impact and whether it will get worse before it gets better?
I think it will, Tamanna. I think over the next 2 months and a year, I think we'll see a lot more of the impact. Though to the previous point that Vijay made, I think in terms of global focus on offshoring or outsourcing technology, I think there's still enough to be had. So I don't see the large companies, like we said, getting significantly impacted. But when it comes to the early stage, the startup ecosystem, the fact that investors are far more focused on returns and are looking closely at business models as opposed to the growth at any cost period that we went through, I think there would be a definitive slowdown, and also talk of the overall slowdown in the economy or the growth, as we talked about. Having said which, I think there's enough of avenues for growth when it comes to the kind of middle-level companies. That being said, I think between the tech and non-tech spaces, I would see the non-tech being impacted far fewer. If you look at traditional consumer goods companies, they don't have those big 30-40% growth years. They normally 3 to 5%. And even when the downslide happens, they're roughly flat or decline by a percentage. I think the variability is large in the tech sector. That will continue, to my mind, for the next 6 to 9 months. But for the rest of industry, it is largely flat. And even within the tech sectors, when you're talking of IT and such like IT and ITCS, I think it's far less muted than when it comes to the more new age digital technology companies.
You know, we're talking about just technology companies, but Credit Suisse, for example, also announced layoffs recently. Tech and then finance usually follows in cycles like this. Rituparna, will it all depend on how the next couple of quarters go? Whether that feared global recession truly deepens, or whether there is some sort of a shift in mood?
Clearly, the signs which are coming out right now from the West are not at the moment very encouraging, even in the financial market space. It's not just Credit Suisse. There are murmurs about other larger financial services organizations also coming out with not so great news. So that's always there at the background, but and there will be some impact, and especially the Indian tech sector, which does have large outlay and large part of the business dependencies on that sector. I mean, I'm sure it's a little more diversified, but financial services does take a large chunk of every Indian services company's portfolio. However, I'm a little more optimistic about India. I think the fact that India's overall economic dependencies on other, countries are probably far less than many other sectors. So I'm just hoping the domestic consumption side of India probably will be able to help us tide through probably the expected downturn or some kind of recessionary impact. But I think we live in a world, sometimes there is pandemic, there is a recession, there is a war. I personally think that every organization should make peace that we'll never have anything called a normal world, that this is how the world is likely to be. And hence, we have to get wiser in terms of our choices that we are making, whether in terms of organization structure, the way we operate offices, whether the way we hire human beings and human resources. I think the whole landscape is likely to change. This nostalgia of the past, I think we should just let go of it, because I don't think the past.
What is the nostalgia, Ritu? What is the nostalgia specifically you're talking about?
I think we all know that our life probably used to be a lot more predictable. I mean, things like a job. I think we need to get prepared, because this is how the world is likely to be. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's why we're human beings. For us, our natural intelligence tells us what we need to do in circumstances like this. We've overcome harder, difficult situations. I'm sure we'll get through this as well.
So how do you prepare? I think, as we wrap up this conversation, it's interesting, or it'll be useful to give some real life kind of advice. How do you prepare? Is it important? Because, here you have companies cracking down on moonlighting. I mean, in hindsight, it's a great idea to have 2 gigs or 2 jobs or a backup plan. You never know when the rug is going to be pulled out from under your feet. So, Ritu, what would you tell people? How do they prepare?
We have to first and foremost be multi-skilled. I think we have to be, when it comes to professional skill sets, we need to demonstrate more than one ability. We need to make peace with learnability. We need to be fungible in the way we utilize our skills. We need to demonstrate our ability to handle ambiguous situations. I do believe that Indian professionals and youth in the current world are much, much more at an advantage in comparison to anyone else out there. So it's not even a surprise to me that so many global CEOs in recent times are coming for India, because we are inherently gifted, besides in terms of our probably academic and skill levels in certain areas, we're gifted to be able to handle a very uncertain, dynamic, ever-changing world. So I think we should sharpen those things. We should remain learnable. We should be open to learning all the time. We need to be fungible. We need to be flexible. And we need to be able to prepare ourselves to handle unforeseen, unpredictable situations. Otherwise, the basic operating system is all available. There's nothing that I can say, but I think these are the underlying foundation on which we should approach the future.
Or at least prepare yourself mentally. That's the very least that you can do, I suppose. I'll have to wrap it here, but thank you so much to all of you for joining us on the track today as we track this story. Unfortunately, this seems like just the beginning, not really the end of the season of layoffs. We'll have to see how far and how deep those cuts go. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you.